Hi, and welcome. My name is Laura Turner. I'm the Executive Director for Health Professional Student Association, which is the publisher of the Student Doctor Network. And with us here today, we have Andrew Paulson. And Andrew Paulson is a certified student loan professional. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
That is.
Awesome. And he's going to be talking to us today a little bit about student loans, how to best manage them, and answering your questions. So we're going to start out first. I wanted to share a couple of financial resources that are available through studentdoctor.net. One is our medical school application cost calculator. And this is a really helpful tool that allows you to create your budget for applying to medical school. Now, it's a little different now because of COVID. You might not have the same costs associated with travel, but generally the costs to apply to medical school are pretty significant. You have travel costs, you have test prep costs, you have testing costs, there's application costs. There's a lot of costs that go in there. And this is a tool that will help you create a budget for those expenses. And the other thing I wanted to highlight from Student Doctor Network is part of the Student Doctor Network community. We do have two forums that are specifically targeted towards finance and financial aid. One is our finance and investing forum, where you can discuss different finance and investment options. And the other is the financial aid forum, which will allow you to discuss different financial aid questions that you might have. So those are two things that are specifically finance related with the Student Doctor Network. And now I'm going to turn things over to Andrew and allow him to start talking about some important things that you need to know about student loan management.
Wonderful. Thanks, Laura. This evening we'll be talking about how should we be managing student loans. And, I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of myself, what we do at studentloanadvice.com, and how we can help you out there, get done with those student loans that many of you are going to be taking out for medical, dental, and other professional degree programs. Next slide, please. So yeah, quick disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor, accountant, attorney. What we talk about shouldn't constitute formal, personalized financial accounting or legal advice. It's for your information, entertainment only. And last of all, just be sure to double check the accuracy using a reputable source. Okay, so just a little bit on our organization first. I work for a company, I co-founded and I'm the lead student loan consultant at studentloanadvice.com. And we are a white coat investor company. We're going to talk a little bit about the white coat investor here after, but essentially we use the principles that white coat investor believes in, which is helping those who wear the white coat get a fair shake on Wall Street, or rather helping you sort through all the information that you don't learn in the classroom in terms of insurance, how to manage your money, how to budget, how to pay down your student loans, and how to do that in the best fashion possible. So with studentloanadvice.com, you are able to meet with a student loan professional that walks you through the best options of managing your student loans, can save you, lots of hours of research and stress. And because many of you are taking out or have mortgage-sized student loans, potentially helping you to manage that student loan debt. When it can be quite tricky, they give you answers to any questions that you have on student loans, and above all, get you on the right path to managing them and give you clarity about your financial future. So a little bit about me. I am not a physician, but I have a specialized background in student loan advising. I studied business and accounting in school. And after I graduated with my master's degree in accounting, I earned my certified student loan professional, which is kind of the gold standard for student loan advising, which helped round out my background of investing, finance, and experience. And I also, I'm married to a nurse, and she had student loan debt when she graduated from school. I was fortunate when I was in school, I had some athletic and academic scholarships, so I didn't have student loans coming out. But she did, and that was kind of our foray into trying to figure out how to manage student loans, and it can be tricky and nuanced for everyone, as there's a number of different repayment plans and loan forgiveness options. But the reason that I set up this company, studentloanadvice.com, is I was approached by an organization, the White Coat Investor, which is another financial platform similar to Student Doctor Network, that is a wonderful, wonderful resource for those of you out there that are in the process of trying to figure out how to get into medical school or dental school or whatever it may be, and then being able to succeed in doing so. And they approached me and said, we have so many people that need help with student loans. And we came together and created this organization, studentloanadvice.com, to be able to give people customized and tailored advice to getting out of student loan debt. So in essence, I'm kind of a financial nerd who loves to help people solve their financial problems. And this is how we serve people in one-on-one consultations. You'd meet with one of our student loan experts. We create a customized student loan plan for you, answer any and all of your questions, then give you about 6 months of email follow-up, because after my client consultations all the time, they're sitting down, running the numbers in their head again, and want further clarification on questions that come up. We charge a one-time flat fee of $479, and then there's just a link to how you can book a consultation. It's just studentloanadvice.com/book. And then a little high level on the White Coat Investor. It's a financial resource for physicians. Well, it was begun as a blog for physicians that morphed into dentists, other healthcare earners, and broadly high earners. And there's a book, podcast, blog, forum, there's conferences, so lots of different resources, however you learn. And then there's a number of the topics that are discussed: personal finance, investing, student loans, insurances that you need, practice management, contract negotiation. So everything that you didn't learn in the classroom, they are very covered and dialed in on that. And it's also written and tailored in a way that you in healthcare can understand that and make sense of it. But for our conversation today, we're talking about student loans. And here's just a couple of high-level topics that we can discuss. We can be going as simple as starting with student loan 101, getting in depth to repayment plans. What are your different loan forgiveness options? Should I consolidate my student loans? Private refinancing, and above all, how to make a plan. And look forward to answering any and all of your questions.
Great. Well, we can go ahead and get started taking questions. If you have questions that you would like Andrew to answer, you can go ahead and put them in the comments section of whatever platform you're using to watch this live stream. So whether that's YouTube or Facebook, you can go ahead and put those comments in there, and we will endeavor to answer them. We'll go ahead and get started. We have a few questions that we have prepared. So let's go ahead and start with the basics. What do you know about student loans? And I'm going to make myself smaller here so that it's all about Andrew.
Yeah. So kind of how I was talking about in my introduction, we had some student loans, my wife and I, when we graduated school. So that's the first thing, is I've had them personally and have had to figure out what to do with them. And then I have a specialized background in student loan advising that helps me understand how to take anyone's situation and then create an optimal plan to manage them. The repayment plan that they should be looking into. Should they be considering loan forgiveness? Should they be considering refinancing or consolidating their student loans? How does that differ when someone's single? How does that differ when someone's a sole earner in the household or dual earning households? Some of you out there are both, you marry or you find a partner who's also a high earner who has student loan debt. So I can take all of those different data points and help you create an optimal student loan plan to get out of debt as soon as possible in the best financial way.
Let's ask, so what types of clients do you work for? Like, who do you normally work with?
Yeah, since I am a white coat investor company, I work with lots of doctors, lots of dentists, pharmacists, PAs. So really anybody in healthcare, and particularly those that have gone to graduate school, because I tend to work with those that have about $50,000 in student loan debt or more. And I've worked with people that have upwards of $1 million of student loan debt. Usually when they've both gone to, expensive undergraduates, maybe they're career changers, and then they decided to go to medical or dental school or pharmacy school thereafter, right? I've met with doctors that started out as attorneys and then wanted to go to medical school after. So I work, but even though I work with a lot of healthcare, by no means am I completely focused on that segment. But really anybody out there that has student loan debt that needs help managing it, but generally those that are going to see the largest value add in working with an organization like ours is if you have over $50,000 in student loans. So I'm very commonly working with those of you that come out of medical school or dental school, because the average student loan debt now is $200,000 to $250,000. So those are very common amounts that I'm working with people every single day to manage and get paid off.
Yeah, there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal, I believe, talking about the high costs of veterinary school and I believe optometry school. And it doesn't surprise me that you've seen people who had $1 million, as a couple in debt together. So what are some common pitfalls that you see your clients have fallen into?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them, and I'd like to preface that with student loans are very, very complex, and it's really easy to make mistakes on these because it's not cut and dry. If you have all the different repayment plans have nuances to them. The forgiveness plans have nuances to them, and there's like a dozen of these different repayment plans essentially, and it's different for federal and private student loans. But I'd say one of the number one things that I see clients doing is, number one, when they're in school, they borrow too much money. They are, kind of living maybe above their means in college. So that's the first one. Don't take out more loans than you need. And, because what's another 10 grand, over time that's growing interest, and that $10,000 could turn into 50,000 overall. So that's the first one. Just try not to borrow more than you need. So maybe that means living closer to campus or taking public transit, or budgeting a little bit less on how much you're spending on food, or finding a roommate to live with when you're in school. So that's the first one. And then I think the second one is going into forbearance when you are, for those of you that are going into residency, I would highly recommend against that, just because what happens is your loans, when they're in forbearance, they're still growing interest. And, if we take an example of somebody who has $100,000 of student loan debt at an 8%, interest rate, pretty common, that those loans are growing at about $8,000 a year. And if you go into forbearance, those loans will continue to grow, or essentially accrue interest. And then when you exit the forbearance and you enter repayment, whatever the interest balance or accrual is during that time, that's going to capitalize onto your loan balance. So, example, if you didn't make any payments for a year and that $8,000 accrued, then your loan balance has now gone up to $108,000, and it will start accruing off of that. And, for those of you that are pursuing a loan forgiveness program, if you're on forbearance, that time period that you're on forbearance doesn't count. So that's one of the other big ones. If you're going to be in a loan forgiveness program, or you're in a training period at a medical or dental school or whatever graduate degree program you're doing, look to get into an income-driven repayment plan generally. Then another common pitfall I would see people doing is many of you took out private student loans, maybe at the undergraduate, maybe at the graduate level. When you get out of school, your income, generally has gone up significantly. I would try to private refinance. And I see a lot of people are keeping hold of those big interest rates far, far too long into their careers when they're paying 7, 8, 9, 10% perhaps on those private student loans, when they're just going to end up having to pay those down because those don't tend to have nearly the forgiveness provisions that federal student loans have. So that's another big one, is to try to get that interest rate down. When if they're not federal student loans, you can private refinance those student loans, which means taking your existing loan and having another lender or a new entity pay off that student loan and then issue you a new set of terms. So you could private refinance 5 student loans, or you could do 1. Another big thing is not doing it early enough, like I had said. And then I think another thing, for those of you that are going into these graduate programs, most of you aren't going to be graduating when a lot of your friends are entering the workforce when you're 21, 22. Start making savings towards your retirement accounts and start paying yourself, in essence, and not just putting all your money towards your student loan debt. To make sure that you're making a concerted effort to do that, so that when the time comes, you'll be able to retire.
Okay, that sounds like some really good advice for folks and things that people should look out for. I want to remind everybody that they can put comments in over on the comment section of wherever they're watching, if that's on YouTube or if that is on Facebook. Enter a comment in and we can pull it over to ask Andrew about. So I will go ahead and pull over a question from Shivas, who says he's curious how Andrew suggests prioritizing paying back student loans. So should you contribute to your 401k or invest, or just focus on paying down those student loans?
Yeah, so I think that I would definitely be in the camp. Those of you that are new grads should be starting a retirement plan. And a lot of your employers are going to offer you a retirement plan. And some may even offer a match, where if you put in 3% of your monthly paycheck or biweekly paycheck, whatever it may be, they're going to contribute money. That's kind of like free money that you end up taking. It does vest over periods of time. As if you stay at your employer for a year, maybe you only get to keep 10% of their match. But yes, I would definitely do that. And for those of you that are interested in a loan forgiveness program, in order for you to go on one of the federal loan forgiveness programs, you have to be enrolled in what's called an income-driven repayment plan, or an income-based repayment plan, they call them, where your payments are based off of your monthly payment, your monthly income. And the payments are based off of the most recent income. So example, if I was just, newly graduated and I was enrolling into an income-driven repayment program right now, they would ask for my most recent tax return. And in my last year of medical dental school, I didn't have any income likely. So I would end up certifying my income and then getting enrolled into payments. But if, hypothetically you earn $60,000 a year in your residency and you were contributing 10 grand to, let's say, a 401k, what it does is it drops your taxable income from $60,000 down to $50,000. And it would actually drop what your monthly payment is, because your payments in an income-driven repayment program are based off of your adjusted gross income. So that's your gross income minus any of those pre-tax contributions you make. So not only does this start your retirement nest egg, but it can actually bring down your monthly payments for a time, which can help provide you with some cash flow relief. So I think it's definitely a win-win to start investing, start putting money into retirement and then paying down on your student loans.
Well, that brings up another question of, should you invest or pay down student loans? I mean, certainly the market has been spectacular over the past couple of years. What is your advice to folks on that question?
Yeah, because there's definitely talking heads on both ends of the spectrum. Some people are going to tell you, well, you shouldn't be paying anything towards your student loans because student loan interest rates are so low. Once you get out of medical or dental school, you can then get them down from 7% to 2%. And why would you be paying on that 2%, interest rate bearing student loan debt when you can be making 10% a year in the market? And, the last decade after the 08-09 recession, just aside from that little blip that we had in March of last year when the market tanked for a couple of days, maybe a month or so during COVID, the market's been going up for years and years and years. And we understand that there's going to be recessions going forward. Every 10 to 12 years, we have these corrections where prices get too inflated, investors get scared, and the rates will go down. So, those of you that ended up getting that 2% interest rate on your student loans and then putting a bunch more money into the stock market or real estate, whatever it may be, you're looking really smart and brilliant. So hypothetically, if that was for the future, makes a lot of sense to do that, but that's not always the case. There's going to be market corrections and there's going to be times that the market will go down, but that student loan interest rate is guaranteed. That 3% or that 4% or that 5% that you're paying is going to be there until number one, you pay it off, or number two, you get it forgiven. So then there's other people on the end of the spectrum that say that you should be putting every single dollar that you have towards your student loans and not saving anything to retirement. And I think there's a case that can be made for that as well. But I tend to fall kind of in the middle of that, where you should be paying yourself first, putting money into retirement accounts, and paying down your student loans. And if you're, then the two big ways that I see people, from graduate degrees, particularly for you physicians out there or pharmacists is that you're going to be looking to two options of public service loan forgiveness and private refinancing. And, if you're private refinancing, that's usually more of an aggressive path. And you should be doing, paying those down quickly. And then if you're looking at loan forgiveness, like a public service loan forgiveness, trying to minimize your payments over that period of time.
Okay, there's another comment or question from Shivis. He says that it sounds like you're a big fan of refinancing student loans for lower rates. So what things should go into making that decision? And are there protections you lose if you refinance public student loans?
Yeah, great question. So a number of factors. What kind of loans do you have, first off? And what is your income going to be when you are out of your professional degree program or you're out of a training program like a residency that you're going into? Because if you're going to be earning more money than you owe in student loan debt, like let's say you're making a typical physician salary of $250,000 when you get out of training, and your student loan debt's only $100,000, where your income's more than 2 times your debt, you're not going to have anything left over to get forgiven. If you're on a loan forgiveness program, you're going to pay your loans off before you get to a loan forgiveness program. So a big factor going into that is what kind of loans do you have? And what is your debt to income, student loan debt to income? Because if you have private student loans, you tend to not, there really isn't much in terms of loan forgiveness options for you out there. So the usual strategy is try to get your interest rates down whenever you can. And when you get out of school, you are starting to make money, and you can, when the underwriters are giving you an interest rate, they're going to give you better terms if you're making money, because they're taking risk on you. And when you don't have any money and you don't have any income, they're going to make you pay really high interest rates. But then as you go through the years, when you're making money, and it's even more nuanced if you're in your residency, when you're making $60,000 a year to when you become an attending. where you can then end up refinancing as a resident and then refinancing as an attending, as those interest rates will continue to go down for private student loans. Now for federal, it's a little bit more nuanced, where you have to look at, because if you do private refinance, you convert your loans from federal into private, you do lose some protections. Like number one, your payments based off of your income, like income-driven repayment. You would no longer be eligible for two of these big loan forgiveness programs, public service loan forgiveness, and another one that's called taxable forgiveness. And also, in the event of death and disability, federal student loans are discharged tax-free. But once you private refinance, if you're married, you're likely going to have your spouse or your partner co-sign with you. And if they co-sign, they then become jointly liable for your student loan debt. And in the event of death or disability with private student loans, they're not discharged tax-free. They tend to be discharged, and then you end up having to pay a tax on that amount. And say you had $400,000 of student loans and you were in a high tax bracket, that could be a $150,000 tax bill. And then some of the private lenders out there, you'll just have to end up paying them off, even if your spouse, couldn't work or had passed away. So a huge protection that federal student loans have is that death and disability. So when you're putting your foot down and you're making this decision between keeping your loans federal or private refinancing, just a couple of things to keep in mind and protections that you lose. And then I'd say another, factor into going into that decision, should you be keeping your loans federal or should you be private refinancing, is your debt to income. And I think those of you that have student loan debt to income of 1-to-1, say you have $200,000 of student loan debt and $200,000 of income, this is usually a case where you can be looking at loan forgiveness or you could be private refinancing. If you're, if your student loan debt is, let's say, 2-to-1, then you should definitely start looking at that loan forgiveness options, just because the numbers tend to work in your favor more and more as your debt becomes more than your income. But on the flip side, when your income's more than your debt, that's usually where, moving away from those federal protections can tend to make financial sense for most of you out there.
Okay. Well, thanks for the detailed explanation of the different risks and things with different types of refinancing options. Just want to remind everybody, we do have the ability to bring these questions over. So if you have questions, please put them in the comments of either Facebook or YouTube, wherever you are watching the webinar. And you kind of talked a little bit about this. How do you pick a repayment plan? So should you go income-based? Should you, what factors should go into selecting that repayment plan?
Yeah, so really it depends on your profession. And, I know a lot of this community are physicians, and that are physicians in medical school. So for you, when you graduate medical school, you're probably going to have $200,000 to $250,000 of student loan debt, maybe more than that. And if you have your loans federal, you have a number of repayment plans. You have a standard, which is just a 10-year repayment plan. You have an extended, which is a 25-year repayment plan. And then you have these income-driven repayment programs where the payments are based off of your income, no longer the debt size. And that standard 10-year payment plan on a resident salary is almost always unaffordable unless you have a high earning spouse, because you're making, after taxes, $4,000 a month, and your monthly student loan payment could be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month in the standard 10-year payment plan. So I see a lot of people aren't going to go into that standard 10-year payment plan because it tends to be too high of a hurdle. So then you figure out, what are my other options beyond that? And that's when you look into the 25-year extended, or you look into the income-driven repayment programs. And for those of you that are trying to get set up for or interested in a loan forgiveness track like public service loan forgiveness, which happens after 10 years, tax-free, or the taxable, which is 20 to 25 years to get loan forgiveness taxable, you need to be in an income-driven repayment program to then start getting credit towards that. So the first thing to figure out is, what are you going to do when you get done with school? Are you going to work in a non-for-profit, in a government entity, in a 501c3, or are you going to work in, a for-profit business or a private practice? Those of you that are going to be working, or potentially going to be working in a non-for-profit or a 501c3, definitely probably enroll into an income-based repayment plan when you're in your training, to keep the door open for a loan forgiveness program, because almost all of those residencies out there are at teaching hospitals, and that employment tends to always qualify for public service loan forgiveness, for example. And then, so then it's trying to figure out which of those different income-driven repayment plans fit best if you were to do that. And most of you should be in repay or in pay-as-you-earn. And then, the decisions between pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn tends to be based on, if you're the sole earner in your household or you're single, you should probably be in repay while you're in your training. If you have a spouse that's earning money, then you should perhaps look into pay-as-you-earn. There's a little bit more strategy beyond just the way that sometimes your repayment plans, the way you file your taxes, can end up getting factored in. Then it can get quite nuanced if you and your spouse have student loan debt, or just you do. But you usually, if you're on an income-driven repayment program, you're trying to minimize your payment as much as possible. And if you're on more of the aggressive pay down strategy, it's trying to make the highest monthly payment that you can. So one way or the other, you're ending up maximizing your value. And on the loan forgiveness side, the least amount that you pay towards the loan, the better, because then you get more forgiven at the end of the day. And then on the aggressive pay down strategy, the less interest that you're charged, the larger payments that you make over time.
Now, there have been a lot of stories in the news about the difficulty folks have had getting that loan forgiveness. Is that something that you've seen? Is that something that you help folks with, getting that loan forgiveness after they've been doing the payments over time?
Yes, that is something that we help people with, and helping them navigate the rules, the different nuances to the repayment, the federal loan forgiveness program. So yes, and we can talk about the different forms that you need to file, who needs to sign those, the frequency of doing that. How do you work with the loan servicer to make sure that they're keeping track of that? Because there's a lot of talk out there that sometimes the numbers don't get added up correctly, and people get to the end of their forgiveness track and they apply, and they let them know that, hey, you still need to make a couple more payments. So those are things that we work with clients with, every single day, helping them navigate that process and getting them on the right track, so that over the years they're getting credit and payment count towards those loan forgiveness programs. So when they get to the 10 years in PSLF or the 20 to 25 years in taxable forgiveness, that yes, they would then be eligible for the loan forgiveness.
And are we starting to see more people getting those loan forgiveness programs now? Shivas had a question here about asking if anybody's actually, that very few or none have been granted. I know that's been discussed.
Yeah. So, the latest report that has come out in March of 2021 was that 8,500 people have received either public service loan forgiveness or temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness. But over the course of this year, I think that number is going to at least double in terms of people that have actually gotten loan forgiveness. And, a number of reasons why. Well, number one, in particular, this public service loan forgiveness was enacted back in 2007. So it's still a relatively new program. So for anybody to have reached the 10 years of employment, and it had to be employment from October 2007 going forward. So nobody was going to get their loans forgiven really until 2017. And so that's one of the things, is that it's still relatively new, and there's people that are starting to get it. And, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that the success rate has been extremely low for public service loan forgiveness. 3 or 4%, or whatever the most recent article of Forbes that's covered it, right? And a couple of reasons for that. I mean, it's new, and also that number that they're using for that 3, 4, 5% is taking into consideration everybody that's applying for public service loan forgiveness. So not just people that have gotten to the 10 years. This is people that are in their second year, that are just certifying their employment each year that you're supposed to do. So it's definitely diluted that number way, way down from what it should be. So we're hoping that they'll improve that reporting, that that number ends up being the amount of people that have actually completed all the different requirements of 10 years of qualifying employment, full-time employment, 10 years of payments in an income-driven repayment plan, and then have actually, then have applied, because it's taking into consideration those that haven't reached it yet. And then another big confusion on that is a lot of people had student loans prior to 2010 that were actually not eligible for public service loan forgiveness, because there's two different types of loans that have been issued by the federal government. So when you go and you take out student loans, you're generally offered what are called direct federal student loans, which means they're issued directly by the federal government. Prior to 2010, they used to issue federal family education loans as well. And that was 75% of federal student loans issued prior to 2010 were these FFEL loans. And these FFEL loans, this program went defunct back in 2010. And what was happening is people that had these FFEL loans were going through 10 years of making payments, following, checking all the boxes that they needed for public service loan forgiveness, and then getting there and not getting their loans forgiven because these FFEL loans were not eligible for loan forgiveness. And that was the majority of borrowers prior to 2010. So that's definitely brought down the success rate as well. But what leads me to more of a positive outlook going forward is there's been some really significant overhauls on public service loan forgiveness. And it's in particular to those borrowers who had FFEL loans or were perhaps on the wrong repayment plan, back to 2007. So, this recent emergency order, it really comes on the heels of COVID to help borrowers, because frankly, I think the loan forgiveness program has been a bit of a disservice for a lot of people out there. But anyways, what it has done is it has made it so if you had those FFEL loans, the way to convert those into a direct student loan is through a direct federal consolidation. So now you can carry over all of your past payment history that you've made on these priorly, ineligible student loans, and you can carry that over through a direct federal consolidation. And if, let's say that you made payments on the extended 25-year repayment plan, you didn't know they were eligible for PSLF, and you'd made 10 years of payments. Now those 10 years of payments will then qualify. So there's definitely people in huge droves that are starting to get public service loan forgiveness. And I think this is kind of the tip of the iceberg thus far, as these changes are kind of only around for a year, but then they're trying to really implement that into law moving forward for student loans. So I think there's a lot of positivity in terms of people getting it, and frankly, the information out there is getting better and better.
That's great to hear, because I know that we've seen so much in the media that was very negative on that program, and so it's nice to hear that sounds like they're starting to get it cleaned up a little bit. Just want to remind everybody, if you have comments or questions, please enter them in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching this. We'll go over to another question. Get back to studentloanadvice.com in case folks who might have come on a little late don't know who Andrew is, so he can talk a little bit about that and what studentloanadvice.com does.
Yeah, so I'm a certified student loan professional, and I do one-on-one student loan consults every single day. That's all I do is help people manage their student loans in the most optimal manner, whether it be through a loan forgiveness program or through an aggressive pay down strategy, and get their loans behind them as soon as possible. And in Student Loan Advice, we conduct these one-on-one consultations where we meet with you for about an hour. and we create a customized student loan plan that's tailored to your income, your financial situation, whatever profession you're in, and then guide you to the best repayment plan options to get your loans paid off as soon as possible. And oftentimes it ends up discussing the nuances to your federal or private student loans, private refinancing, consolidation, repayment plan selection. And then aside from that 1 hour consultation, you also have 6 months of email follow-up with our experts on any questions that you have.
Great. Well, you had mentioned that you had you've had at least one client who had over $1 million in student loans because they were a couple, both who had very expensive student loans. What would you say is like your worst horror story of what you've seen as far as different what people's financial situations were or issues with student loans that was the scariest thing you saw?
Yeah.
As much as you can disclose.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I don't want any of my clients coming on here being like, hey, you told me about my situation now. But I think generally what I've seen is, I think the highest amount that I've probably seen in it's been, I think for an individual has been about $700K for someone. And I think it was somebody who went to an expensive undergraduate and took out loans for that program. And then they went to another professional degree program, like they went to law school, and then they ended up going to medical school. They ended up going to pharmacy school. And so, very quickly over those years, it stacked up and it got up to about $700K. But I have consulted with couples that have more than $1.2 million in student loans. So I think averaged between the two people was $600K plus. And, and I think there's some of you out there as well that can feel this is a large burden and it can be stressing you out. But I just want to let you know that there's options for you. There's different ways to pay them down that can make it so the monthly payment tends to be affordable, because so many of us that have gotten into these graduate programs, it's really easy to get the student loans, going in there, the financial aid is going to bend over backwards to cut you a check for however much you need. But then the actual pay down process can be difficult, can be nuanced.
Okay, we have a question from someone who is just tuning in, and they're saying, theoretically, if an outpatient PCP wanted to quit medicine, would one be eligible for public service loan forgiveness working in a non-medical position for a 501c3 exempt employer?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I work with public school teachers too. I work with attorneys that are working in non-for-profits or that are working in 501c3 entities. So absolutely, it's not limited to physicians or limited to nurses or limited to PAs, right? As long as you're working at an entity that qualifies, number one, as a non-for-profit or a 501c3, and then number two, that you're working full-time, and usually that's about on average 30 hours per week or whatever your employer categorizes as full-time, yes, then that would end up qualifying.
Great. Well, we have another question here from Shivas. And so as a flip side to the question about the worst horror story, he wanted to know, what is your best success story?
Oh, man. Best success story. Let's see. So I remember meeting with someone who was thinking that they were going to end up paying on their student loans forever. Thought that they would pay these till they pass away. And they were 20 years into their career. They were not a physician, or not in healthcare. And, they had taken out about $110,000 of student loans, and they were only earning about $50,000 over the years. And with the changes that had happened recently with public service loan forgiveness, their payments at the time that were in the extended 25-year repayment plan, which were quite low, only a few $100s a year, her 10 years of payments that she had already made were now going to qualify her for a loan forgiveness program. So in total, she was going to end up saving about $200,000 in student loan payments. And this was going to utterly change. She thought she was going to be working well into her retirement. And she was only about 5-10 years out of retirement. And now this meant that she was going to be able to have a lot more peace of mind in terms of what she was going to be able to do, spending time with her spouse and her grandchildren. And that was definitely a life changer for her, in terms of just a one-time meeting that we were able to figure out for her.
Oh, that's a really heartwarming story that she's been, because I know the big loans are such a burden on folks. It's something you're constantly thinking about. We do have a comment here from Elena from Facebook. Thank you for joining us. But she does mention, even with an affordable payment, the loan's still accruing interest. So she's, there's the concern if you don't get into residency after medical school. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So, if you don't get into residency after your first year of medical school, right? You don't match for whatever reason. I've met with people that have been in that very situation. So you can, it is a tough thing that the interest will continue to accrue, right? But you can get, if you're on an income-driven repayment program, and hypothetically, if you're out of work, you can certify. You can certify with your loan servicer and let them know that you're out of work, and they can make your payments $0 for the time, or maybe they can even put your payments into forbearance. So I definitely think that at least that can help hold you over for a little while until you start in residency. But that's probably what I would try to do in that situation. And then if you could make any payment at all, try to pay down on that interest, because just know that once you get out of forbearance, whatever interest has accrued on your loan at that time is then going to capitalize or become principal as well on your loan balance.
Okay, we have another question here from D. Griff. They wanted to know if are loans forgiven through public service loan forgiveness considered tax-free?
Yes, they are. And I know there's probably some of you out there that are wondering, well, are they going to phase out high earners? Are they going to change it? For those of you that currently have student loans or that are getting student loans right now, yes, those rules would be applied, even if they change them down the road and perhaps they made PSLF taxable, or maybe they phased out anybody that made above $200,000. But yes, the loan balance that you have remaining after 10 years is tax-free.
Okay, and I just wanted to comment. We've gotten some good questions here. If you have other questions, we have a few more minutes remaining in this webinar, so you can go ahead and put those in the comments of Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching this, and we'll address them on screen here. Jumping over to want us to ask about what differentiates studentloanadvice.com. I don't know if there are other services out there that do this similar stuff, but what makes you different?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people out there who help with student loan advising are financial advisors. And what they try to do is they want to bring you on because many of you are going to be high earners, and that means a good client for them that's going to give them good income over the years. And what their end goal is to not keep you as someone who just has debt, but to convert you into a traditional financial planning or a financial advising client. And I think some people will need that. Some people will need that financial advice, or maybe they just don't want to do that. But with student loan advice, we are very strictly focused on student loan advising and helping you find the optimal way to pay down your student loan debt. I don't have any conflict of interest of converting you into a long-time financial planning or a financial advising client, so I can give it to you very straightforward. What are the best ways for you to manage your student loan debt? And I don't have any ulterior motives along those lines.
Okay, we got another question in here from Master Grimm. They're a graduate student, and they're taking out $150K in loans that will come out making $80K, not a physician. And I know obviously it'll vary, but generally speaking, are there any rules? I know you mentioned the debt to income ratio. And so this person looks like they're about 2 to 1 as far as their debt to their income.
Yeah, so I think that's the first thing to look at is what's your debt to income. Okay, it's 2 to 1. So, I think that you may be a candidate for one of the loan forgiveness programs, but then it depends on what you do. What's your employment? What type of an entity are you going to pick? If you end up working at a non-for-profit or a 501c3, I would definitely look at public service loan forgiveness for you, because the numbers are probably going to work out in your favor. And then if that wasn't the case, you're going to work at a regular for-profit entity, right? Then I would look at probably private refinancing that student loan to a reasonable monthly payment that you can make for the future. Now, if your debt was, let's say, 3 or 4 times your income, and you were going to be working at a for-profit, regular organization or business, then you could look into taxable loan forgiveness. That tends to be when the numbers work out in your favor for the taxable, which is 20 to 25 years until your loans are forgiven. And like the name says, your loans aren't forgiven tax-free after making 20 to 25 years of small monthly payments based on your income. It's taxed. So that if you had $100,000 forgiven in 20 years' time, that would get added onto your tax return and then would be taxed accordingly.
Okay, we have another question here that is on about not matching in residency. So I guess, and I don't know if this is getting a little bit out of your area of expertise, but what would you advise a medical student who is not able to match despite repeated attempts to match?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think and I know we had talked about this question earlier as well. If you're planning to still go into residency and you're still trying for that, I think staying in an income-driven repayment program right now is going to help provide you with some cash flow relief, unless you're working at like a consultant and you're making a lot of money. It's like, I have no idea what your income is. If you're making, good money, maybe you should just start paying off your student loans. Because if you're in the situation where med school is no longer an option and maybe you're not going to practice as a physician, then maybe it's some point in time, it's coming to grips to, okay, I need to start kind of finding something else to do. And then once you've found the right fit job, whatever that may be, then identifying the best way to pay down your student loan debt. And then it goes back to looking at your debt to income again, like we were talking about earlier. How much, you have $300,000 of student loans, and are you going to be making $150K a year? Maybe you should be looking into a loan forgiveness program. Maybe your loan, your employer offers some loan repayment assistance. But I'd say that if you're going to try to get back into residency, perhaps just keeping the door open, keeping your loans federal in the meantime. But if you're positive that you're not going back into residency and you really want to start paying these down, by all means, you could private refinance and start paying them down in more of an aggressive manner.
Okay, we have a few more minutes available for potentially for additional questions. If anybody has them, they can put them in over at the comments area, either on YouTube or Facebook. I'm going to go ahead and throw up this flyer that Andrew has created. So it gives you a little bit more information on the services from studentloanadvice.com. They can help you with the optimal plan for your student loans. And again, if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and enter them over in the comments there. We also want to highlight again that StudentDoctor.network has some forums. If you want to discuss student loans or financial aid or finance and investment in general with your peers, you can do that on the Student Doctor Network forums. We also, for those students who are looking at going to medical school, offer a medical school application cost calculator that you can use to calculate how much you're going to end up spending on your application process for medical school. So the entire medical school process is expensive. It starts with the applications and goes all the way through. And that's why, there's services available like what Andrew Paulson and studentloanadvice.com offer. So I just wanted to thank Andrew for his time. It doesn't look like we got any more questions right now, so we'll go ahead and wrap things up. We're at the end of the hour. I want to thank you very much for your time. And do you have any kind of closing thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I think thank you so much for having me on, Laura, and being able to speak and get to know you better and address the student doctor network. But I think what we've been talking about thus far is there's a way for you to manage your student loan debt, and whether you have no idea where to start or you just want to make sure you have a well-oiled plan, please feel free, reach out. You can find us at studentloanadvice.com, and we'd be happy to help you align your student loans with your overall financial goals and to get those done with as soon as possible.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful evening and a very happy holiday season. Take care. Have a good evening.
See ya.